Thank you so much, everybody. Thanks very much for having us. You are our favorite kind of audience to speak to. So quick agenda, we'll introduce ourselves briefly so that you know whether or not you should listen to anything that we have to say. And then we're going to share 10 stories and bureaucracy hacking tactics as recommendations that maybe inspire some ideas of how to get things done in your own bureaucracies, and then have time for Q&A. But I really would encourage, if you have questions as we go along, please drop them in the chat. And if there's a way we can kind of naturally answer them in the course of talking, we'll definitely do that. And if not, we will get to you in the Q&A after that. So definitely would encourage that level of interaction. So who are we? I'm Marina Nitze. I was most recently the Chief Technology Officer of the Department of Veterans Affairs under President Obama for 5 years. I entered the federal government through the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program because Nick tricked me into coming in for just 6 months to come in, and then that ended up being almost seven years. I helped do some things like found the U.S. Digital Service, and I'll share some stories today about my time at the VA. Today, I do two things. I do IT crisis consulting with my partnership called Layer Olive. Usually our clients are confidential, but one of the things that we can say that we did publicly was help turn around California's unemployment claims backlog during the pandemic. So I think I saw at least one name here that I've worked with before. So hey, ODI. And then I run the Resource Family Working Group in Child Welfare for New America, which is a 20-state working group. So extremely excited. I have 20 states, not 38. So Nick, I'll catch up to you hopefully one day, which is a consortium of child welfare leaders across states that come together to share promising practices around foster parent licensing, recruitment, placement, and retention. Nick.
Hi, everyone. Nick Sinai here. My day job is at Insight Partners, a venture capital firm investing in great software companies. I'm also an adjunct at Harvard Kennedy School. I teach tech and innovation in government. It's a lot of fun. I spent almost 6 years in the Obama administration. I had thought it was just going to be a year or two, but I got attracted to the scale, the complexity, the mission, most importantly, the people. I ended up as one of the U.S. Deputy Chief Technology Officers, but really was middle management inside the presidency, which was great fun. I got a chance to work with people like Marina, EJ, and some other names I see around on the list here. So really looking forward to spending this time with you all. I did have the occasion to help start and then briefly run the Presidential Innovation Fellows Program, bringing mid-career technologists and entrepreneurs into government. In fact, Marina was in that first class. And I'm just passionate about how do we bring great talent to partner with the existing talent in public sector. And so I've been helping with the U.S. Digital Corps, which is a early career technologists in federal service program that is just kicking off year 2.
Great. So we all already mentioned this, but please feel free to drop your questions in the chat. And we were encouraged to ask everybody a question. So I think a question might be, what bureaucracies are you in right now, whether in your private or your personal lives? And that kind of tarries up to why we wrote the book, which was bureaucracy is often a 4-letter word, right? It's a dirty word. Everybody wants to blow them up, go around them, ignore them. But the reality is we're in bureaucracies all the time. They aren't going anywhere. You can't blow them up. You can't go around them. So rather than lamenting them, we thought it would be helpful to write down how you change them. And if you actually look at them and study them, and it turns out there's a whole set of professionals who are literally bureaucracy theorists who have written books and studied that. Nick and I are not bureaucracy theorists. I wouldn't say that we are bureaucracy hacking practitioners. Bureaucracies change all the time. And it's about understanding how your bureaucracy changes so that you can leverage those patterns of change and the mechanisms for change for good and for the work that you want to see. So we're really excited to share, hopefully, a message of hope, whereas we have worked in some of the toughest bureaucracies on the planet, right? Like the White House, Department of Defense, the VA. And we saw and learned from colleagues who made really huge change really successfully. And we'd love to share those stories with you. So that's really why we wrote the book. So now we're going to share 10 tactics and stories, and we'll alternate. And the first tactic I'm going to share is called Find Your Paperclip. So some of you may be familiar with this story. There was a blogger many years ago who, through a succession of barters, traded a red paperclip for a house. And when I started at the VA in 2013 as the chief technology officer, this may sound like a fancy title that comes with a lot of resources, but maybe some of you can relate to this, that I started with 0 employees, $0 of budget. And yet I was told that my job description was to redefine the art of the possible for how America honors and serves its veterans. So no big deal, right? And I had just spent the previous 6 months prior to being CTO of the VA auditing the VA from the White House, which made me extremely popular. And so everybody wanted me to come to their meetings. And so I'm sitting alone in my office many days wondering, like, what am I going to do? I tried to get a dry erase board, which is like my favorite thing. And I couldn't get a dry erase board because I had $99 worth of office supply budget, and government dry erase boards cost $105. And also OSHA regulations prevented me from bringing in my own dry erase board. So literally all I had was a drawer of paper clips. And I was thinking, how can I use this? You know, I have technical skills. I have some things I'm bringing to the table. How can I turn, you know, my skill set and my paper clips into something? And it reminded me of that story again of the blogger who traded the paper clip for the house. And so as I'm sitting there sort of thinking about what I might be able to do, one member of the executive secretary pool popped her head into my office. And she said, "Hey, Marina, have you seen Green Pack 42? And I said, "No, I don't know what that is. And no one's talking to me. So I definitely don't have it here in my empty office, but I don't have anything else to do. I'll help you find it." And so I end up roaming around this 12-story huge office building looking for Green Pack 42. And what a Green Pack is, it's simply a green file folder that contained a letter from a member of Congress. So when, you know, a member of Congress or a member of the executive, another agency sent a letter to the VA, it would go in this green folder. And then everybody that wanted to weigh in on the response, you know, the official VA response would put in their edits, and then the response would get typed up and it would go on its way. And so realizing that this incredibly valuable pool of people, the executive secretary pool, were spending all their time wandering an office building looking for missing green folders, I wrote a little Ruby on Rails program that printed a barcode on the front of the file folders. And this being the VA, in the course of looking for Green Pack 42, I found a closet of abandoned barcode scanners. So I passed those out to the different people that might get the green folders, and they could scan in the barcode. So it would mark whose desk the green folder had last been at. I called this folder finder because I love alliteration, and my maiden name is Marina Martin. So I was alliterative at the time, but the secretary pool called it M-Boop, M for Marina and boop for the sound that the barcode scanner makes. It is still in place today, 11 years later, and it earned me political capital in my first paperclip trade, which one of the most important groups in any agency, which is the executive secretary pool, right? And so then I had pulled together my Post-it notes with a vision of what could the VA be, right? Like, what would it be like if we had one website instead of 1,581, which is actually how many websites the VA had? What would it be like if you could apply for all your benefits in one place? What would it be like if the VA hired technologists? What would it be like? On and on and on. And put this together in a vision document, which I used my newfound political capital and paperclip trade to hand out to my peers and assistant secretaries and other leaders at the VA, asking them to weigh in on this vision and let me know if they wanted to be a part of it or if they had feedback. And because of this, they started getting excited about it. They felt like they had buy-in. Our ultimate boss, Secretary Shinseki, got a copy of my vision document and was into it enough that he came back and gave me a head count of 2. So now I have traded my paperclip in. Now I have 2 people, still no money. And then a few months later, the federal government was about to launch something called the GI Bill comparison tool, which was going to be the first website launched after healthcare.gov, which you guys may have heard went super well. And so now the VA is in charge of launching the next presidential initiative website. And the team over it was pretty panicked because they did not want to be the next healthcare.gov, but they didn't know how to not be it. And because the executive secretaries, they were like, "Oh, well, Marina can print barcodes. Maybe Marina can help with the tool." And I showed up, was like, the first thing we should do is some load testing, see how many people can use the tool at once. And it turned out it crashed at 8 users. So this obviously was not going to go super well. And so myself and some presidential innovation fellows who at that point had been landed in the VA rewrote the tool over a weekend, put it up on GitHub pages. I had to swear on my non-existent firstborn to White House comms that the website was going to stay up. The IT tried to performance test the new website. So they tried to performance test GitHub pages. It crashed the performance testing computer. So that was a good sign that it was going to make it through the presidential launch. And now I had a successful, right? Like VA had a successful news story under its belt. So I had 2 FTE and a successful news story. And this political capital kept rolling up. And I'll tell some more stories over the course of the hour with us of how I traded my paperclip for political capital, many millions of dollars of budget, and a headcount that was ultimately 75 people when I left the VA. So the message here is find your paperclip, whatever it may be. Maybe you're a great speechwriter, maybe you're a great event planner, maybe you can print barcodes on something, maybe you can find one little thing that you can do in your environment that you can trade up for more resources that you ultimately need to get your bigger goals done. So that is find your paperclip. And Nick, I will pass it to you.
Great. I love that story. Even hearing it many times, it's always a great story. So I'll tell a story of my own. When I was a relatively young adjunct lecturer at the Kennedy School after I had left the White House here in Cambridge, Massachusetts, I ran into David Gergen. And David Gergen, he's been in 4 White Houses. He's basically on CNN every day in my mom's kitchen, kind of a living legend of folk, a national figure. And he says, I hear you teach on technology and innovation. Will you come guest lecture in my class? And I said, well, I'd love to, but I'm only on campus on Fridays. And he's like, no problem. I'll change the class. And he basically had 100 people show up on Fridays to accommodate my schedule, which was horrifying when I found that out, that he had done that. And so, but we have a good class where I'm talking about how we got things done in the Obama White House, and we put up a whiteboard of a bunch of sayings. And one of the sayings is about hacks versus wonks, right? And so I described that really in the White House, there's a series of guilds, and hacks and wonks are 2 kind of prominent ones that we would tend to focus on. And it's something that we would counsel our colleagues in the Office of Science and Technology Policy, which were very much other wonks, scientists and kind of technical experts, that they had to understand the hacks, the people who came from comms and campaigns and other backgrounds, who were very skilled in narrative and kind of explaining policy to the American people. And these are just 2 very different fields, and yet they have to get along and work together really well in the White House. And so it's kind of explaining this, and this was kind of one of our unwritten rules, or actually a written rule on this whiteboard. And so I said to David Gergen in front of about 100 people, I was like, so you see, I'm a wonk and you're a hack. And there's a really kind of long, awkward pause, with 5 seconds, 6 seconds, and he kind of leans in and he looks at me, and I'm just like, oh shit, like I've just really stepped in it here. And he's like taller than he looks, and he's scarier than he looks on TV, et cetera. He served in the Navy. He probably could still kick my ass, even though he's got many decades on me. And it's just like that awkward pause, and then finally, after maybe 10 seconds, he's like, "You're absolutely right. No one had ever told me this. I wish I had known this before I started working with Larry Summers. Like this is, and he goes on, and I think he's just being very, very kind. And he starts to describe how important this was and how much this was something that he wished he had known, is just understanding the different guilds. And so it's one piece of advice that we talk about in the book, is understanding which guild you belong to and building bridges into other guilds. And in fact, what we talk about in the book is this idea of a cuirass, this informal network that was put in place not by you, but by the universe, and that really the job is to find these folks who may not be in your same guild, but want to come together and get important things done. Marina likes to talk about, too often we focus on a mindset of people trying to block you, or people trying to have these intentions that are against yours, when really a much more helpful perspective here is to think about, you just have to go find these people who can be helpful. And you have to build authentic, trusting relationships based on mutual understanding and reciprocity with these folks. But it's that informal network, that caress, that is so important if you really want to get things done in large organizations and certainly in government agencies.
Yeah, and the caress comes from Kurt Vonnegut's Cat's Cradle, if you have not read the book. So that's we have borrowed that term from him. So the next section we want to talk about is talking to real people. And this is one of those tactics that feels obvious, I think, probably to many of us. And yet I don't use it myself as much as I should. Like it's a good refresher reminder of the importance of it. And two stories here from the VA. The first one was when I first started at the VA, I'm a fairly shy person. And also I had, no resources and this incredible mandate. And so I wasn't quite sure what to do with that. And I started early on in my time at the VA, taking a Design for Delight course from Intuit. And the first assignment was that they made me sit at the Menlo Park Hospital for the afternoon on a bench and talk to anybody that came and sat next to me, which was approximately on my top 100 things of things I absolutely did not want to do, but I had to go do it. And a very nice woman sat next to me and started telling me her life story. And the long story short, her husband had been hospitalized at the VA for the last 9 months. And she loved the nurses, loved the doctors, loved the healthcare, had nothing but positive things to say about the VA and her experience with them. But as she's telling me their family story, I'm ticking off all these other VA benefits that this family is eligible for: pension, higher education benefits, other things. And so after she finishes telling me about how great all the healthcare had been, I ask her, well, what other VA benefits do you and your family take advantage of? And she said, what other VA benefits? So it was possible to live in our hospital for 9 months and have no idea that we actually had 82 other benefit lines. And that was very eye-opening in terms of how the VA had been so structured to have veterans have to understand how the VA was structured, rather than, no matter how a veteran was coming in to interact with us, how we would kind of meet them where they were. And that really inspired a vision that VA actually just won a Sammy for last week, a Sammy being the government equivalent of the Emmys or the Grammys. VA won a Sammy for having the best customer experience in the federal government, which is pretty mind-blowing when you think back to where it was, 10, 11 years ago. I hope that's a message of hope too, right? And so one of the visions there that the VA has absolutely carried out since is the idea of measuring the veteran experience, centering the veteran experience, and making the VA work for veterans wherever they are, whatever they need, and not expecting them to understand how the VA works. A second really monumental shift in talking to real people with the VA was around our healthcare application process. So VA was on the front page of the newspaper a lot. I'm not sure if that's something that some of you can relate to in your states, right? It's pretty off. It's not every day that you get a positive news story. You're usually in the paper for something negative. And one of these many news stories was that there was a warehouse with 800,000 pending paper applications from veterans who were trying to enroll in VA healthcare. And the Inspector General had discovered that at least 100,000 of those veterans had died waiting for us to process their enrollment, which is unforgivable. And the VA was going to approach this like it approached every backlog, and it had quite a few, which was, we're going to do mandatory overtime. We're going to type faster. We are going to type more of those applications in so we get them through. And my team and I were like, there has to be a better way than typing paper applications faster. But how are we going to get traction for this new way that was going to seem much riskier than the safe way being mandatory overtime and extra data entry? And so some of my team members, Emily and Courtney and Marianne, had the very genius idea to go out and sit with real veterans who were really trying to enroll in VA healthcare, and with their permission, recording it. I'm not going to play the link because sometimes that works funky on a live stream, but I included a link. I'd encourage everybody to watch the video. It's only 3 minutes long. And they sat with a veteran named Dominic, who is struggling with housing, struggling to get VA healthcare. but he blew up every possible stereotype people had about veterans that were struggling. He was funny, he's tech savvy, he's smart, and he shows how he's trying and failing to apply for VA healthcare 12 times. And people saw this video and were like, oh, Dominic obviously must not qualify for VA healthcare. How could you apply 12 times and get rejected? But he was qualified for it. And he got enrolled the next morning. And so we tried our new approach with him, our pilot, which was, what if we give everybody a very simple web form? And even if you're not digitally savvy, we kind of put out a call to all Americans. Hey, if you know someone whose healthcare application is sitting in that backlog, get them on a mobile phone and you fill out this application so we get them through right away. And Dominic, when he tried our new form, declared that he would use it over anything the VA ever had to offer. So we consider that pretty successful. Since then, 2 million veterans have instantly enrolled in VA healthcare from their mobile phones on this form. And it was not a crazy rocket science machine learning innovation. It was a form that did basic data validation and other things that we needed so we could skip over the warehouse and the backlog and we could get people instantly enrolled. And it was really that 3-minute Dominic video that gave us the space and the leadership buy-in to make that change. And so I cannot encourage enough. It's the basis of all my foster care work these days, is to sit with real people that are really going through your process and observing them with their permission and in an ethical way to really highlight where the broken parts, the points of confusion, the missteps are in a way that you're just not going to be able to see from the inside. Nick?
So I spent 4 years as a policy staffer, essentially, in the presidency, and that meant shoveling a lot of paper. But it also meant, I had an opportunity to start and help scale various initiatives. The Presidential Innovation Fellows Initiative. I also worked on an initiative to make energy data more available in machine-readable formats called the Green Button Initiative. So in actually California and maybe some of the other states, you can download or make available to third-party apps via a standard called the Green Button. And so there's a series of initiatives that, especially in our office, we would try and get started with other agencies, with outside stakeholders, et cetera. So whether you're talking about formal regulation, whether you're talking about initiatives, or you're just trying to make a small change inside your office, I'm a big fan of actually writing it down. And we spend so much time telling each other ideas over coffee and lunch and on Zooms and everything, but simply picking up the pen and writing it down can be super powerful. Now, of course, there are good ways and bad ways to do this, and there's a variety of different techniques to this. But one thing that I'm particularly passionate about is writing a one-pager, because a single one-pager has the highest likelihood of being read versus a long memo, and it requires some discipline, right? If you're actually going to put the bottom line up front, if you're going to articulate the problem and bring a story or a fact or a statistic in there, articulate the solution and a couple of concrete next steps, all in a single page, reasonably spaced, that's powerful as a finished product. But what's also powerful is if you can do it collaboratively. That is, you write it down and you share it with some friends and you say, what do you think? And get some feedback, and then maybe share it with some more colleagues and a boss or some friend's boss, or get some more feedback, right? And as you get that feedback and incorporate it, you are essentially building some sort of consensus around an idea. You're essentially getting some level of buy-in. And even if they don't agree with it, at least they're going to point out areas where you're overstating your case, or the example doesn't support the general, or what have you. The nice thing about a one-pager is it travels, right? The thing about any good size organization or bureaucracy is that there is this challenge of socialization, of new ideas, of existing things, right? And so we spend a lot of time trying to communicate in bureaucracies. And to the extent that you make it easily digestible, especially a new idea, so that someone can forward it or celebrate it and share it widely, I think that's a really powerful way to get started on something. because it can also help you attract champions, supporters. It helps you unearth that cuirass. You even find people who might oppose it, but are going to tell you that and give you some feedback about why this is going to be challenged, or you really got to go talk to Roger, and this is why Roger's going to give you a particular hard time. You know, the other tactic that we're really passionate about in writing stuff down is writing it into the machinery of the bureaucracy. And so we're big believers in understanding how the bureaucracy actually works, and then using its natural motions, its natural rhythms, the way it codifies decisions. Use that to your advantage. And so pick up the pen, and whether that's a strategy document, whether that is a rulemaking, whether it's an RFI, whether it's a dear colleague letter, whether it's a preamble, whether it's a principal speech. There's just so many opportunities to start taking the goodness that you all are working on, and you know, I'm not saying don't get it cleared with the right set of folks, but you can start to build it into that scaffolding, because bureaucracies don't say something once. They actually say it in a bunch of different times, in maybe a budget justification document, and then in a speech about what our priorities are, and then a strategy, and then in a blog post announcing the new director of whatever, right? And so the more that you can have those talking points, those facts, links to past work that is showcasing what you're talking about, you're going to help the bureaucracy further solidify the change that you want to see.
Yeah, Nick, to this day, sometimes Nick still asks me for one-pagers. So it's an amazing thing. And I never regret ever having written one, because it's always, you never know when somebody's going to be like, hey, I need to know about your idea in the next hour to include it in something. So I'm going to talk next about, this is, our book has 56 tactics in it. This is absolutely my favorite. And it's the idea of looking between the silos. So the larger your bureaucracy is, we're all used to silos, right? Or we're going to specialize, and this department is going to do step one, and this department is going to do step two. But as that process gets more and more specialized, it becomes increasingly rare for anybody to own the end-to-end process, and increasingly for anybody to even know the end-to-end process. And so an amazing opportunity for pointing out inefficiencies, streamlining a process, getting political capital, or just learning how to make change in your bureaucracy is to look between the silos. And the best way to do that is to follow a real claim, a real person, a real application, a real case, whatever you may be dealing with, from start to finish. And by this, I mean, if it goes through a fax machine, you show up on the other side of the fax machine. If it goes to the mailroom, you show up in the mailroom. Because when people describe to you abstractly how a process works, or when you read the employee manual of how a process works, that is never actually how it works. You have to really crawl through and follow it step by step. And one of my favorite stories, so a lot of my work tends to be around streamlining government processes. And now in foster care, one of my goals is reducing and streamlining the licensing process for foster parents, particularly for kinship caregivers, because this process that can take hundreds of days of like Byzantine loopholes of paperwork means that grandparents, aunts, uncles, et cetera, are not getting any money for the kids that are currently in their home. So the kid is there and they have to feed them and clothe them and everything, but they don't get money until they finish this paperwork process. So I'm very, very interested in making that process as efficient and effective and short and easy to follow as possible. So in one state, I'm following this application process from start to finish, and it leads me to a woman's desk who is going to request the applicant's driving record from the DMV. And she pulls out a carbon copy triplicate form. You guys know the ones where you press really hard and it's like pink and blue and yellow. And she says, oh, I hate the DMV. Those people live in the 19th century. They make me use this carbon copy paper. I have to mail it. I have to get a stamp. Like, this is a lot. I hate this step more than anything. And I did what this woman was not empowered to do. I wandered over to the DMV and I said, hey, can you show me how you process these driving record forms? And the woman there said, oh yeah, absolutely. Here's our electronic request system. The requests come in on the left. I click on them. I fulfill them. And I'm saying, well, wait a minute. I saw some carbon copy paper. Where does that come in? And she said, oh, you were at child welfare. Those people live in the 19th century. Like they keep sending me this carbon copy form. Why don't they use our electronic system like everybody else? And so I'm like, oh, please hold. And I run back over to child welfare. I introduce these two people and boom, we've shaved 32 days off the application process. We've removed a really obnoxious step that nobody wanted to do. And it was entirely because nobody owned that handoff. And it was nobody's job to look at that handoff. And I have so many stories like that. I could probably teach an entire class just on looking between the silos of opportunities that you find, whether it's data quality issues, it's shaving time off of a process. Also something when employees maybe say like, hey, I'd love to do this new step for you, Marina, to help make the customer experience or the end user experience better, but my plate is already overloaded, right? The silos is often the place where you can find the space between the silos is often the place where you can find those steps that you could eliminate or reduce so you can get something off their plate so they can then take on that task or that extra step that you need them to do to make the end user experience better. So I really encourage you whenever possible, even if you've been in your role for 30 years, go follow a claim from start to finish and see what you find. Nick?
So this is one of my favorite tactics, which is to create people flow. And the idea is, can you flow people into your organization or can you flow people out of your organization? Bureaucracies do change over time, but you can increase that rate of change. And temporary people who are coming through as fellows, as interns, executives or scientists and residents, other kind of non-traditional mechanisms are ways to increase the talent density, the velocity, the new ideas, the energy, all of that. And when you pair that talent with experienced teams and air cover, mentors, all of that, and it's about the joint project and the joint team rather than you got to be very careful about putting them up as the heroes when 90% of the work is being done by the team that they're pairing with. But if you pair them together well on a project, on a mission, you can achieve really fantastic things. And so we saw that with the Presidential Innovation Fellows, who have done tremendous individual projects in all kinds of things in helping veterans, in disaster recovery, during Superstorm Sandy or more recent disasters. But they've also been, founding members of 18F in the General Services Administration, helped start the U.S. Digital Service. Marina is a former one as well. So you can just see the opportunity that comes as a talent strategy when you create that people flow. And it may sound counterintuitive, but I'm also a fan of thinking about how to flow people out on a non-traditional basis. Because the normal way is like, just get out of here, we'll have a nice cake and that's we wish you well on whether it's 8 years or 20, or 30, like, thank you for the time that you spent here and God bless, and maybe join the alumni network. But if you can think about ways for people to have experiences outside of your organization and come back, and just as one example, the Defense Department has done this, and they are increasingly doing this. So my venture firm, Insight Partners, participates as part of the the Defense Ventures program is run by a company called Shift. So this Defense Ventures program essentially takes active duty service members and places them either in venture capital firms or in the software companies or portfolio companies that they invest in for 6 weeks. And they get a chance to try this out. That's a very short period of time, admittedly, but they get a chance to get a glimpse of the innovation economy and build some relationships, and taking that learning back to the military service. And so I'm a big fan of people flow, whether it's in or out, and it's just worth talking to your HR professional. It does take a little bit of work to create a new program. I have some scars on my back from Presidential Innovation Fellows program, from the U.S. Digital Corps, and from other programs I've been around with. But it's much easier when you find an authority that is underused or unused. and maybe you can relaunch it or dust it off and get people excited about it. Authorities are only as good as the people that you attract. And so I think that's the hard part about this is you really have to be intentional about finding talent, diverse talent that are able to meet your needs and the needs of whatever project or team you're putting together. And so that requires you to put on your recruiter hat, your sales hat, and go find those people, get them excited in the mission. But I think that's a very important tactic to kind of bring some new energy, especially if you don't have the budget and resources to create a dedicated team. I think it's a really interesting hack to kind of add that extra talent.
Awesome. And I think Govern for America specializes in these sorts of local and state fellowships. So if you guys don't know about that program, Octavia is a great resource and may be able to help on the schedules. So the next one I'm going to talk about is trying the normal way first. So often in bureaucracies, we hear from our peers or our leaders that you can't do something, and that is just taken as a given. When you actually try it, you may be surprised to discover that the rule banning you from doing it doesn't actually exist. Or if you go down to read the source rule or regulation or policy, it may give you actually a lot more flexibility than you realize. And I really learned this lesson when I was at the VA when we were trying to get cloud computing. And I bet some of you have probably had some challenges of getting what you need from IT, right? If you had that challenge, put it in the chat. And so I wanted to use cloud computing at the VA because at the time our websites often were down. They lived on computers that were literally in our office building, including in one example, in a mop closet, which for those of you that are not in IT, you are not supposed to put servers near water. And the cloud computing would also save us a lot of money because, if a bunch of veterans went to the website at 2 o'clock, it could scale up like electricity usage. And then if a bunch of people did not go to it, we would not be paying for all those extra computing resources during the time. But everybody at the VA kept telling me, Marina, it's illegal. You can't use cloud computing because you can't put the cloud in an evidence bag. And so my team, we investigated this a little bit. And the source of this rule is actually that the inspector general, when they conducted investigations, so somebody said, hey, something fishy is going on with this website or this application, they would walk into the room where that application was hosted. They would pick up the computer physically, they would put it in an evidence bag, and they would carry it back to their office to conduct their investigation. And that was the only way that they knew how to do their work. So when you talk about cloud computing that's going to be done offsite at centers that they can't access, they were like, oh, we can't do that because, Amazon or Google or Microsoft will not let us come in and pick up their computers and carry them off in an evidence bag. And so we spent a lot of time understanding, but what's the source requirement here, right? The law isn't you have to put computers in evidence bags. The law is they need to be able to conduct investigations thoroughly. And so we showed them through a series of brown bag lunches and meetings, et cetera, how they could use a suite of tools that come with a cloud, like log searches, that they could actually do their investigations from their desk and didn't have to lift computers anymore and didn't have to buy the plastic evidence bags. And the highlight of my entire professional career was the day that the inspector general at the VA issued a memo saying that they preferred logical access over physical access to computers to conduct their investigations. So this unlocked this, rule that you could not possibly move past. And it was because we tried the normal way first. We tried to get the approval, and then we understood the actual source issue and we worked through it. Then we hit another hurdle, which was on the IT approval paperwork. There was a question that said, did you jiggle the doorknob of the server room to confirm that it's locked? Well, spoiler alert, Amazon and Google and Microsoft frown upon letting random strangers show up and jiggle their doorknobs. They will not let you do that. And so I couldn't fill out the paperwork. So I tried putting not applicable, sending it in, got rejected. Tried sending it in, explaining metaphorically how I had jiggled the doorknob, got rejected. Tried to leave it blank, got rejected. Tried to persuade the woman who was in charge of approving the form of the importance of her getting through the paperwork, also rejected. But that then made me realize, what we have to do is we have to change the form itself. And it turned out that the process to change the form was just for people in IT who all were completely on board. And the awesome bureaucracy hack that this ended up being was when I changed the form, I changed it so that it was actually impossible to get through it if you weren't using cloud computing. So now you could not put the computer in the mop closet. You could not have a computer that was up 50% of the time and had business hours on your website. You could not put a computer, under your desk and declare with no backup and no, rollover availability. And so that was probably one of my favorite, although it took 2 years, bureaucracy hacks to ultimately change the form itself. And VA is now a cloud-first agency. And I'm not saying it's entirely all due to that form, but it is partially because we tried to get the cloud through the normal process, and that uncovered the actual hurdles step by step that needed changing. And then we changed those so that the path of least resistance for everybody that came behind us was the path that we wanted them to take.
Okay, relax fixed constraints. But before I do, there's a question in the chat or a comment in the chat about the natural rhythms of bureaucracy. Matthias said, would love to hear more, especially if you've got examples of a natural rhythm you focused on to achieve a larger goal. So just, and I'll tell a natural rhythms of the bureaucracy in this particular tactic and story. But before I do, I just point out that the schedule is your friend, and that's part of the natural rhythm of a bureaucracy. So for example, every year there's the UN General Assembly in New York, and the president would travel to that. And if you knew that to be the case, then you could start planning 6 or 9 months ahead of time and use that as a forcing function. And in fact, I was co-leading the open government reforms with a series of agencies who are working on improvements to open government. Some of it was FOIA reform, some of it was open data, other parts of it was declassification. I really was doing the coordination more than anything else, and putting it together in a open government plan as part of the open government partnership. A bunch of countries and civil society working together, but knowing that you had that forcing function, I think was powerful to when you're working across a bunch of different agencies. And so that's just one example of the natural rhythms. Is there are events that become planned, and then there are events that are unplanned. And it's just thinking about as you can, at least the planned ones, and then being as ready as you can for the unplanned ones. And some of them have, if we're going to a particular meeting or there's an annual thing, there may be a set of clearance processes or a way that people are thinking about what are we going to unveil or what are we going to say at that event, because we've made past commitments or we're expected to unveil a new climate initiative at that particular event, right? So it's just starting to work backwards from those natural timing. Schedule just being one part of that natural rhythm. The story I wanted to tell here in Relax Fixed Constraints, I think this will, I think the New Jersey folks will really appreciate this. Josh Gottenheimer, who is a New Jersey congressman at the time, was a FCC advisor. And there's a meeting that was very memorable to me, not to anyone else, but basically he gave me and a White House colleague of mine, Kumar Garg, a really hard time one day when we suggested kind of expanding E-rate, which is the subsidy program for broadband and especially for schools. And so we basically had laid out this idea to him at a coffee shop across from the White House, because that's kind of an easier place to visit from all the security perspectives. And we just got torn a new one. And he basically said, like, look, Rockefeller will never go for it. Rockefeller's people have been adamant that E-rate is not to be touched. You guys are being politically naive. You don't know what you're doing. You're out of your lane and all these kinds of things. And he was right. We were out of our lane, sort of, and it was a constraint, and yet it's one of those things that ended up not being as big a constraint as anyone thought, because eventually, when folks were checked with Rockefeller and his people, it turned out that they were willing to play ball, and while they had been adamant that this thing had was not to be touched because they were worried about it being dismantled. In the political climate that conversation happened, they actually were able to get on board with changes of modest increases to the surcharge in the Universal Service Fund to help fund broadband to schools. And at that point, in 2011, 2012, you had more broadband in a cell phone than you did in many schools, and it was actually quite pathetic. And it was only in this concept of getting the FCC and people in the FCC to understand that that these constraints can be relaxed, or you can explore relaxing these constraints, were we able to kick off a policy process. And speaking of the natural rhythms of bureaucracy, Kumar and I worked to get this idea into the State of the Union and failed. But at least we started to socialize it with not just the FCC, but the Department of Education and other relevant agencies and councils in the White House. And so it was that there's a whole kind of build up to the State of the Union. And so that natural rhythm was one that let us get enthusiasm and consensus inside the administration on this particular idea, while there was a lot of great external pressure to help wire up schools and close some of the equity gaps as it relates to schools. So I'm a big fan of how do you relax fixed constraints. The longer we're in an organization, the more we tend to see things as fixed, right, rather than variable. These are fundamentally just a collection of humans, and the humans have made the rules. May not be the humans that are there today, but some humans have made these rules. And most things are changeable at some point by some set of humans. And so it's just a question of, can you find other people to work together and say, well, what if we were to relax a particular constraint and think about how to do this differently? And just getting Josh and getting the FCC, a great kudos to him, and of course the various chairs at the FCC to make this a reality, because there's a big gap between a policy idea and actual implementation. And what was exciting about this one is it actually has meaningfully closed the broadband gap at schools. So see if you can develop that shared sense of agency with your colleagues and challenge them about which constraints are truly fixed forever.
Thanks, Nick. So I'm going to talk now about don't try to make the bureaucracy care. And this is a mistake I made a lot when I first joined government. It's a mistake I still make sometimes, and it's a mistake that I see a lot of people make constantly, which is, from my story earlier around cloud computing and my story earlier around Dominic trying to get healthcare and the backlog. Nowhere on the IT approval forms for using modern technology or for redesigning the application was there a requirement that a veteran be able to enroll in healthcare, or how many veterans will not get healthcare if we make this decision or if we don't make this decision, or how many foster kids are going to sleep in the office lobby tonight if we don't make this decision. That, while it is in our hearts and our minds and it's in our conversations, it's not on the approval process. And so understanding deeply what the actual approval process is and doing whatever you need to do to meet that approval process in service of your bigger goal is really a really important bureaucracy hack. And it can also make bureaucracy hacking less emotionally difficult, right? Because if you're arguing with IT about the number of veterans who will be homeless or foster kids who will be homeless, I guess it's my constant theme. If they don't approve a spreadsheet tool, you're not going to get anywhere. But if they give you a form about the CIA triad, which is confidentiality, integrity, and availability, you fill that out for the spreadsheet that you need. And that is how you're going to get the tool that you need to help prevent the homeless veterans or the homeless foster youth. Again, this can be a hard one to learn, but people are definitely swayed by emotional arguments, but approval processes are not. And so when you're faced with this, just encourage you to kind of take a step back and ask yourself, am I trying to make the bureaucracy care, or am I trying to meet the exact needs of the approval process? And as we shared earlier, if you can't meet the approval process for whatever reason, because the question is outdated or because it truly doesn't apply or whatever it may be, can you change the form? Can you change the policy? Is it a fixed constraint, as Nick said, or is it one that might be able to be relaxed? those are different conversations, but there's usually no spot on the form for feelings. So, and Nick, I will let you close it out with our 10th tactic.
All right. This is just a friendly reminder. I know you all know this, but don't forget to do the work outside the meeting, right? So, when we were writing this book, Marina and I had a great dialogue about the usefulness of meetings, and it's important to remember that there are different types of meetings, right? There are meetings where we're all giving status updates. There's big meetings where we're brainstorming or trying to generate ideas. But the type of meeting that we're particularly focused on is the decision meeting, especially where there's lots of folks or there's a formal vote, and those exist, right? There's lots of committees and votes inside of bureaucracies, and we would just remind you to do the hard work outside the meeting, mostly before the meeting, but also after the meeting. And so, in one of these kind of more formal meetings where there's a decision or a set of votes, those are not spontaneous. Hey, we're just, shooting the breeze and trying to figure this out, and you should know exactly how that meeting is going to unfold. And if you don't, it's kind of like the poker table of like, who's the sucker? If you don't know how it's going to unfold, then you haven't done your homework, and you're not in a position to get your project or initiative or budget request approved. And so, have you shared your materials ahead of time? Have you had conversations with allies and prepped them with talking points, maybe key questions if there's a Q&A? Have you made sure your principal or the chair knows why this is important, and so forth? And for those that may get outvoted, or if you're going to say something negative, we have this other tactic in the book about stabbing people in the chest. That is, the first time that you're going to vote no on someone's initiative, or if you're asked for your opinion and you kind of point out some problems, that big meeting is not the best time to have that be the first time that they know your point of view or your dissent, right? And so it's really important to build authentic trust with people doing the work outside of the meeting, so that you're best positioned when those formal meetings come up. And even if the decision is a foregone conclusion, seeing the enthusiasm, seeing the consensus or near consensus, and seeing people get excited about it is part of the function of the meeting. So I think both Marina and I have fallen into this trap of like, we know the run of show, we know how everything's going to play, we've scripted out everyone's things, and sometimes in a bureaucracy, there's a little stage management for some of the larger meetings. But those meetings are still important for people to see that enthusiasm, and for people who, especially if the public is involved or something like that. The other point that I'd make is that you have to do the work after the meeting too, right? How do you codify the decisions, the do-outs, et cetera? I was in a group called the Office of Science and Technology Policy, OSTP, inside the White House. And we were kind of a freewheeling culture, but we were next to the National Security Council, and a very formal, buttoned up culture. It is Department of Defense and Department of State and national security professionals. And at the end of every meeting, they would have a formal SOC, a statement of conclusions. And a NSC staffer would write up the conclusions of the meeting, including who had agreed to what and under what time frame and deadline. And you had very little time to agree, consent or dissent to the statements of conclusions. And I realized in today's day and age, we probably take notes more contemporaneously rather than having a staffer write it up and send it around afterwards. But if you're a part of the note-taking process, or if you're that staffer who's codifying who's doing what next, it's a great opportunity to pick up the pen. So we'd really encourage you. I know you all do this anyways, but do the work outside the meeting, before and after, and that will just lead to an even better meeting.
Great. So thank you guys. Slight shameless plug for our book, where we've got 46 additional tactics and stories. I would absolutely love to hear your Q&A now, or hear if you've got some bureaucracy hacking challenges that we could kind of talk through today.